My name is Ben Karst. I work for Workday IT Solutions, and I'm going to provide a webinar for you guys today, which is centered on Excel date functions. Date functions in Excel are something that isn't necessarily understood very well. So today we'll cover some of the basic date functions that are available to you in Excel. We'll look at how we can work with these functions to do some basic date maths and how we can manipulate these. And towards the end of the webinar, we'll look at some slightly more advanced functions and some of the applications using date functions. Workday IT Solutions provides training for you all over the UK. We can provide our laptops and we can tailor courses exactly to your needs. Like the webinar we're doing today, we can provide a specific webinar for you as well if you want any topics to be discussed. We can provide training in all of the applications that you see on the screen at the moment. So Access, PowerPoint, Excel, really all the Microsoft products. We have some trainers that can provide that training on site for you. So if you're interested in any of these products, you can contact us and we can provide that training for you. If you have any questions on today's webinar, you can click on the Q&A button on your Zoom application. That's going to be the main way to interact with me. So if you have any questions, just write your question into the Q&A like feature, and I'll try and get to you as soon as I can. So date functions in Excel, the way they work, and it's, like I say, something that is a little bit funny to understand initially when you first look at them. Basically, Excel doesn't have any concept of time before the 1st January 1900. So the 1st January 1900 is really when time begins for Excel. But before that, no time exists for Excel. So if you try and type any date into Excel that is before that date, then you effectively can't do anything more clever with it. You can't do any of the functions we're discussing today. You can't do any maths. You can't do any manipulation with a date before that first day, 1st January 1900. That is when Excel has been programmed to recognize time from. So the way it understands that, and this is what allows us to do some more clever functions with that later on, is that the 1st January 1900 is effectively day 1 for Excel. So any day after that date is just a serial number for Excel, and that's how it keeps track of time effectively. So the 2nd January 1900 would be day 2, the 5th January 1900 would be day 5, and so on and so forth. So every day since that first day when time began for Excel is being monitored, is being saved as a serial number in the background. And that's what allows us to do some clever functions with it, which we'll see later on. So if you're happy with that basic concept, we'll just look at some examples in Excel how that actually works. So you can see here, I've typed in the 1st January 1900 into a spreadsheet, and it recognizes that as a normal date. But what we can do is we can format that date as a number, if you like. So if I click on number in the format cells tool and click OK, then what you can see is that the date gets to converted to the number 1 effectively. And the reason that happens, like I said, is because the 1st January 1900, even though it looks like a date for Excel, it is just a number. So that number just means it's a day 1 for Excel. So the number 1 and the date 1st January 1900 is exactly the same thing, the same concept for Excel. It's effectively equivalent. So you can switch around between these, and this is one of the concepts that confuse people quite a lot when they first starting to use dates in Excel, or when they start to look at some of these functions, because you might have even seen this before. Sometimes when you're copying some data into Excel from the internet or from different sources, and you want it to appear as dates, then sometimes it just seems to show you a couple of numbers rather than the actual date, and that's all to do with the fact that, like I said, like Excel recognizes any date that it can deal with as a number. So whether it displays that to you as a number or as a date entirely depends on how you format it. So if I take that number 1 and format it as as a date again. So if I click on date, then it's going to take that number one and it's going to format that as a date. But for Excel, for humans, that obviously makes a huge difference because we don't fully view dates in the same way. But for Excel, that is exactly the same thing. Whether you type in the number one or whether you type in the 1st January 1900, it's no different for Excel. Like underlying all of that, it's just the number one for Excel. We then have some sort of clever functions that can help us calculating with dates and keeping track of time quite easily. So for instance, in that second cell here, I've written the today function, which is like any function, you start with an equal sign and then you just type in the word today and two brackets, and open and a closed bracket. And what that function means is, like it says, it effectively gives you the date as of today. So whatever date today is, you can see today is the 3rd of May. So as a result, we get the 3rd of May being displayed in Excel. This is something called a volatile function, because what that function does is it automatically updates every time the time moves on effectively. So if I open this Excel spreadsheet tomorrow, then that same function, even though I haven't changed anything, will jump to the 4th of May 2017. So whichever day I'm opening this spreadsheet from is going to tell me the time based on the system clock. So it's all dependent on that system clock that you've got on your computer. So if you ever change that date here, then Excel will no longer be able to sort of display today's date, and it'll jump to whatever you've changed that to in here. So this is one of the simplest functions you can do, and it's a really good way to keep track of time. So if you have to write reports every day, and you always need to put the date on an email or on your PowerPoint presentation, or whatever it is that you're using dates for, then it's quite an annoying thing to have to do that manually for each report. Whereas if you do that in Excel, you can just type in a today function on top of your report, and it's always going to give you the most up-to-date date, so you never have to bother about writing that out yourself anymore. So just to illustrate that point from earlier again, if I take that date again and convert that to a number, so if I go back to format cells and convert that to number, then once again, it's just going to give me a serial number, which is the 3rd of May 2017. So it's saying at the moment, the number says 42,858. So what that effectively means, because like we said earlier, from the 1st January 1900, Excel has been counting every single day as one date day, in terms of the serial number. So that means that since the 1st January 1900, 42,858 days have passed effectively. So that's how Excel keeps track of time. Like I say, if you ever see, if you copy a couple of Excel dates into Excel and they're displayed as number, you see some numbers appear instead of dates, then all you need to do is highlight them and then convert them back to a date by clicking on Format Cells and then clicking on Date in here. Click OK, and it's going to display that as a date again instead of a number. So that's how you can switch between those two. So why is that important, or why is that even, why does Excel even do it that way? Why do they calculate every single date as a number? Well, the reason for that is effectively that by doing so, we can calculate with these dates very easily, even so it seems a little bit strange, but we can work out any day that we want relative to another day by just doing some very basic maths on these numbers. So for instance, here in that cell, as you can see, I would like to display yesterday's date. So whatever today's date is, I would want to display yesterday's date effectively. So today's date is the 3rd of May, so it should say the 2nd of May in this cell, which it does. But if I open this up tomorrow, then tomorrow will be the 4th of May, so this cell should then jump to the 3rd of May. So I want to change this cell relative to the point in time that I'm currently on, but always going back one day. And the way we can do this, and this is really, really easy, is we can just take the date that we had from the cell above. So A3 is what our today's date was, and then from that date we just subtract the number 1, because, and this is where it seems a little bit strange, because we're effectively calculating with dates, but what Excel effectively does is it looks at that date as the number that we saw earlier, and that number signifies that we've been going from the 1st January 1900 until now, and it just kept adding like a date to the serial number since that point in time. And if we subtract one day, one number from that date, from today's date, then we're effectively getting yesterday's date. If we're adding one number to that, then we would get tomorrow's date. If we subtracted seven from that number, we would get the same date but a week ago. So it just knowing the fact that Excel treats dates effectively as numbers allows us to manipulate them very, very easily and do some very clever maths with it. And a lot of people, try and think of this problem in a very complex way, but all it is really just understanding how dates work, that dates are effectively just numbers, and then calculating with them in some very simple steps. What we can then do as well, and there are some very, very basic, easy functions just to extract other pieces of information from these type of dates. So you can see here, sometimes we just want to look at a year of a certain date, or just look at a month, or just look at a day for a certain date. So maybe you're not interested in the entire date, maybe you're just interested in the month of a certain date, then, or the year, then you can extract that very easily by supplying the functions year, month, and day. So you can see here the year function. So if I take the year function of A4, A4 has currently yesterday's date in it, then that's going to extract just the year part of that function and write it out into Excel. So you can see we had the 2nd of May 2017 in the yesterday's date cell, and the year function just gives me the number 2017, which is the year from that date. Similarly, if I type in month and then take the same sort of idea again, then it's going to give me just a month from that date, but it's going to give you the month in terms of a number, and then we can see the day, extract day from date. If we say the day function of the same date, then it's going to give you just the date from that function. So it's fairly easy to extract any of these dates based on the function that you provide. If you then want to do the difference between two dates, sorry, that's just a question there. It says, does the text always need to be in capitals for the function, I presume? Basically, the function, so you can see we had the today function, for instance, which seemed to be in capitals, and then we had the month function or the year function, which all seemed to be in capitals. Basically, the answer is yes, it does have to be in capitals. Excel always wants every function to be in capitals, but the way that's going to work, if I just type this, if I just demonstrate this somewhere else, even if I type in something that is not in capitals, sorry, if I just type in the same, the same sort of function, but don't do it in capitals, then it will still work. And what it's going to do is, if I click into that cell again, it's just going to automatically put that into capitals. So there's no way to get that wrong. However you type that in, it's automatically going to convert it to capitals anyway. So yes, that's what Excel wants for every function, but it's going to do that, irrespective of how you enter the function, if that makes sense. Cool. So just going back to the difference between two dates, what we can do, and this is quite nice as well, because like we've effectively said that every day every day that we see, we can very easily manipulate by adding dates, or by adding days, or by subtracting days. What we can do as well is we can subtract one date from another. So if we, for instance, subtract today's date from yesterday's date from today's date, so I'm subtracting the 2nd of May from the 3rd of May, then if you remember, both of these dates will be just a number that expresses how many days have passed since the 1st January 1900. So if I effectively take one away from the other, then what I get is the difference between those dates. So that's exactly what you can do. Again, very easy maths, but it's very powerful in terms of how we can manipulate dates, because we can just take any two dates, subtract them from each other, and we find out how many days were there in between the one date and the other. So unsurprisingly, between today's date and yesterday's date, there was only one single day. But this is really good in terms of, you can do this in the future as well. So if you have some future deadline and you want to find out how many days you still have until you have to, file your report or do a certain thing, then you can subtract the future date from today's date, and it's going to literally work out the difference in terms of how many days you've got left until that moment arises. So you can, it's very powerful, and all you have to do is subtract dates one from the other, because internally it's just going to convert that back to a number anyway, effectively. What we can do as well, and this is a little bit what we hinted on earlier, but just to demonstrate that this works in the future as well as in the past. So there's no limit of how far Excel can go into the future, if you like, but there's a limit on how far it can go into the past, which is the 1st January 1900. But in the future, we can express pretty much any date that we want. So you can see here what I've done is I've added 20, the number 20 to A4, which is the 2nd of May 2017. So the date that I've got in A4 at the moment is the 2nd of May 2017, and to that date I've added 20, the number 20. So that's going to give me 20 days from the 2nd of May 2017. And indeed, what the result then gives you is the 22nd of May 2017. So again, that doesn't seem to be that hard, and you can probably do that yourself in your head to just add 20 days to the 2nd of May. But say you wanted to add 100 days or 225 days, anything a little bit further in the future, would be much easier to just literally do that in Excel rather than having to do this manually somehow using a calendar. So anytime, if you have the opposite problem of what we've talked about earlier, if you want to give you're managing somebody and you want to give them a deadline in 60 days, then rather than having to work this out manually yourself, which date that is going to be, you can just add the number 60 to today's date, and it's going to specify directly which what the deadline would be if you want to give someone 60 days, for instance. What we can then do is we can work out the last day of the prior month, and this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, but effectively, if you've understood the concept so far, then these slightly more complicated functions, and we'll look at quite a few more of them into on these other tabs. But effectively, the moment you start manipulating these functions using all the different functions that we've seen so far, then that's where you can really do some very powerful things using Excel date functions, such as working out the last day of the prior month for the first day of this month, or any other specific date that you have in mind. So to work out the last day of the prior month, what we have to do is we supply the date function, today function. So like we've seen earlier, the today function just gives us literally today's date. So the number that is responsible for today's date is supplied by the today function. From that number, we have to subtract a certain other number, but that number obviously changes every day. Like the last day of the prior month is always going to be the same. So if it's the current, like the 3rd of May 2017, then the last day of the prior month will be the 30th of April 2017, and that will be exactly the same whether I open the spreadsheet tomorrow or in 5 days or in 10 days even. But eventually, the moment I leave May and I go onto June or July, then obviously I want this to change to the last day of the prior month. So it should this number, what we want to achieve is this number should stay the same. This date should stay the same throughout the entire month. But the moment I leave the month and go to the next month, I want this to update to the prior day of the last month. So what we're doing is we're using the today function, which is going to change every day. So today it's going to say the 3rd of May, tomorrow it's going to say the 4th of May. And then from that date that we calculate, that we receive, we're going to take away the day part of today's date effectively. So the day part of today's date would be the number 3, because we're currently on the 3rd of May 2017. If I open this up in 2 days, then it's going to be the number 5, because in 2 days will be the 5th of May 2017. So then the day part of that day will be the number 5. If it's the 10th May 2017, the day part would be the number 10. So whatever is the day part of the date that we're looking at, we're going to subtract that from the date we're currently getting. So if we're on the 3rd of May today, and we subtract the number 3 from that 3rd of May, then we're effectively going to day 0 of the month, if you like. We're going to, we're on the 3rd of May, we're subtracting 3 days from that, so we're going to day 0. But since there's no day 0 in any month, what we're doing is that we're effectively going 1 day prior to the first day of the month, and 1 day prior to the first day of the month is the last day of the prior month. So if we're on the 3rd of May, we're subtracting 3 days, then we're going to the last day of the prior month. Similarly, if we're on the 21st day of the month and we're subtracting 21 days, then once again we're going to the last day of the prior month. So even so the function today will be different every single day that we're opening the spreadsheet, because we're subtracting the day part from that formula. We're always ending up at the last day of the prior month. So that is how that works. It's a little bit theoretical if you haven't used these type of functions too many times, but it's a very neat trick to always get the last day of the prior month. Again, if you're writing month end, if you're working in finance, you're working month end reports, that type of thing, you can basically automate entire report structures just using simple formulas like that, because they'll just always give you the up-to-date last day of the prior month, irrespective of which date you're currently on. From there, to make that even slightly more complicated, we can use the first day of the of this month if we wanted to, for instance. Again, there would be lots of other specific dates that we can calculate from, but just using the same example, if you wanted to have the first day of this month, well, that's effectively the last day of the prior month plus 1 day, because whatever is the last day of the prior month, if we add 1 day to that, then we'll end up on the first day of this month effectively. So this is exactly what that next formula is doing. You can see we've got the today function, we're subtracting the day part from that today function to end up at the last day of the prior month. And then at the end, we add 1 day to that, so that we go back to the first day of this month. So the moment, the more you get an idea or a feeling of how these functions work, the more you can start using these type of functions to manipulate them, to get specific days out of your spreadsheet in your data, so that you never have to supply any sort of dates yourself again, which is very powerful. Finally, we've got one more sort of function in this basic on this basic date maths tab, which is the weekday function. A weekday function is something quite specific. If you wanted to find out, what day of the week it was, then the weekday function basically supplies that to you, but it gives you a number rather than some sort of a text. So if you wanted to find whether today was Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, or whether your birth date, maybe you can type in your birth date into Excel, and you want to find out what day of the week was your birthday on. That weekday function basically does it, but instead of saying Monday, Tuesday, and so on, it's just going to give you a number. So it starts with Sunday. So Sunday is effectively the number 1, then Monday is the number 2, Tuesday is the number 3. So since it's Wednesday today, if I say I want the weekday of the today function, then it's going to give me the number 4, because 4 stands for Wednesday. So that can be very useful in certain situations if you want to manipulate with weekdays. Say you're doing a report every Wednesday, then you can combine this with if functions, for instance, or VLOOKUPs or other type of functions to say, whenever it says 4 in here, irrespective of the date, whenever it says 4, then we have to send this report before 11 o'clock, for instance. So you can do controls with this. You can do error checking with this, because the function itself is going to give you directly what type of whatever number it specifies. It tells you directly what type of what the day of the week it is effectively. You can make this a little bit more advanced if you don't like the fact that, so by default, like I say, it's starting with Sunday, it then moves on to Monday, then goes on Tuesday. If you don't like that fact and you want to change it, if you want to, for instance, make the week start on Monday instead of Sunday, so you want the Monday to be number 1, Tuesday to be number 2, and so on, then after you've supplied the date in that function, in the weekday function, you can type in a comma. The moment you type in a comma, you get a list of all the different arguments that this function can take. So you can see here, if I type in the number 1, then Sunday will be 1, Monday will be 2, Tuesday will be 3, and so on. But if I type in the number 2, then Monday will be 1, Tuesday will be 2, Wednesday will be 3, and so on. If I type in number 3, then Monday will be 0, and so on. So you can see all the different arguments that you get in this function, and depending on whatever number you specify here, it's going to give you a slightly different result. So if I type in the number 2, then type in enter, then I'm changing that function slightly so that it's going to start like on Monday rather than on Sunday. So Monday would be 1, Tuesday would be 2, Wednesday would be 3. So hence it's going to give me the number 3 instead of the number 4 that we saw earlier. Any questions so far? Is that fairly okay? Is everyone okay with those type of functions? Brilliant. If there's nothing so far, then we'll look at slightly more complicated date functions that aren't necessarily known across different companies, but that can be very, very useful. The first one that you see here is called the prior workday function, or just a workday function. So if we supply a workday function, then what that lets us do is we can supply any date, and rather than just subtracting 1 or 2 or 3. So early on we saw that if I just subtract the number 1 from the 2nd of May 2017, then it's going to give me the 1st May 2017. If I subtract 2 from that, it's going to give me the 30th of April, and so on and so forth. But if I supply a workday function, if I use the workday function and then subtract 1 from today's date, then instead of just giving you yesterday's date, it'll give you the last workday effectively. So the last workday based on based on that example that you've got here. So like since today is Wednesday, the last workday, if I subtract 1 from that, will be Tuesday. So it's doing effectively the same thing as if we had just subtracted 1 date anyway. Similarly, if I subtract 2, then it's going to give me Monday's date, which is still the same. But if I subtract 3 here, then it's going to jump directly to the 28th instead of the 30th, because it's just missing out the weekends effectively. So this is a really, really useful function, especially in business if you're working across various projects. You want to find out how long has that person taken. You want to maybe check whether their invoice is correct, or you want to price something yourself. You want to find out how much time have I actually spent on this project. Then you can work out the difference between certain dates. You can subtract dates from certain dates, exactly the same way we've done in the basic date maths example. But instead of just looking at all the dates, including weekends, you can subtract the weekends from that, which then gives you a much more useful answer in business, rather than just dealing with all dates there are. We can make this a little bit further, take this a bit further with various functions that we've seen so far and work out the last day of the prior year. So again, these are just very specific dates that we might want to figure out. They're just examples in today's course, but you can manipulate them any way you want once you get the idea. Last day of prior year, one of the ways you can figure this out yourself is you can use something called a date function. And what a date function does is it basically constructs a date out of different parts. So if you've got a year that you've worked out somehow, then you've got a month of a date that you've worked out somehow, and then you've got a day that you've worked out somehow, then you can put all of these informations together inside a date function, and it's going to give you the date that results from these different parts. So you can see the date function needs the year part first. So this part is where the year, the particular year goes that you're going to use. Then after the comma, you supply whatever month you want to use. Then after that, you supply whatever day you want to use. And only if you've got all of these different parts, then it's going to build a day out of those parts. It's going to build a date that Excel can recognize out of all of these parts and display it on the screen. So if you wanted to have the last day of prior year, and again, you can use this function for any other type of date as well, then the last day of the prior day would be the 31st December. Irrespective of which date you're using, it's always going to be the 31st December, because December is 31 days. So we always know that the month is always going to be December, so you can put in the number 12 into the month part. And we always know that the day is going to be 31, so you can put the number 31 into the day part. So that part of it, that piece is always going to stay exactly the same. But where where it gets a little bit different for this particular example is we want to find out the last day of the prior year. So whenever we open that spreadsheet, the today function is going to change. It's going to be a different date. And we always want to find out what was the last day of the prior year. And the way we can do this is we can look at the today function, which is going to give us today's date. Then we can put that today function inside the year function. So that's going to give us the specific year related to today's date. So if today is the 3rd of May 2017 and we want to just extract the year part from that, then if you put the year function around the today function, that's going to give us the number 2017. And once we have, and that's going to give us the current year effectively. Once we have the current year, then we can subtract 1 from that. So subtracting 1 from 2017 is going to give us 2016. So by doing that entire section, this entire formula effectively gives us the prior year. If we wanted to figure out what was the last day of the year 2 years ago, then we would just change the number 1 to a number 2. Or if we wanted to find out what was the last day of the year, or what is the last day of the year going to be next year, then we can just add 1. So instead of -1, we can change that to +1, and it's going to give us the year for next year. So by manipulating or extracting the year part of today's date, we can then manipulate that year to give us any relative point in time. But what we always know, what always is going to stay constant, is that the last day of the year is going to be in December on the 31st day of the year. Another function that we can use is called Networkdays, which can be really useful as well. It's sort of the counterpart to the Workday function that we saw earlier. So we said Workday function is effectively similar to just subtracting days from dates, like we saw in the basic date maths example, but it accounts for only business days, so it ignores the weekends effectively. Networkdays, the Networkdays function is effectively similar, but it works out the difference between 2 dates and then counts how many days were there between 2 dates, but only in terms of business days again, rather than only in terms of work days, rather than accounting for weekends as well. So you can see here it says number of work days between 2 dates, and we've taken the value in A3 and the value in A2. So the value in A3 is the 31st of December 2016, and the number of the value in A2 is the 2nd of May 2017. If I did what we did earlier, if I just calculated how many actual days there were between those dates, then what I could do is I could take the day in A2, and from that day I could subtract the day in A3. And you can see there were 122 days between those 2 dates. So if I just wanted to find out the difference between those 2 dates, then I just subtract 1 from the other, similar to what we've seen earlier. I'm going to get the number 122. However, if I don't want to show every single day that was there between those dates, I just want to find out the actual work days between those dates, then I can use the Networkdays function and supply the 2 dates in that function, and it's going to give me the difference between those 2 dates as well, but only accounting for business days. So it says there were 87 business days between those 2 dates. Even so there were 122 actual days, there were only 87 business days. And the way this function works is it just assumes that the weekend is going to be on a Saturday and a Sunday, because that's what the weekend is for most people. But some of you might have different shifts. You might be working throughout the weekends, like if you work in hospitals or you work on production lines, then you can't just close over weekends. So sometimes people get off, instead, like even though they have to work on a Saturday and a Sunday, they might have their weekend on a Monday and a Tuesday, for instance. So just because the standard weekend is the Saturday and the Sunday, that doesn't mean that's true for all companies and every job out there. So there's another function which is called Networkdays.intl. That INTL just stands for international, but it's a little bit of a funny naming convention, because obviously internationally we still have usually Saturdays and Sundays being the weekend, but all this is trying to say is, no matter where you work, no matter when your weekend is, this function can work out exactly how many days there would be between 2 dates accounting for weekend, but this time you specify exactly what that weekend is. Is the weekend on a Monday and Tuesday? Is it going to be on a Friday and a Saturday? Whatever you specify, that function can account for that. The way that works is it works exactly the same as what we've done earlier. It takes two different dates. So we take the date in A3, take the date in A2, which are the two dates we discussed earlier. But then after that, there's an argument that you can supply. So I've supplied the number 6, and depending on which number you supply, depending on which argument you use, you effectively shift the weekend from Saturday and Sunday to any other sort of point throughout the week. And I've got a little table here to the right-hand side, which tells you all the different arguments that you can use. So you can use, the number 1 if you want to have Saturday and Sunday, which, as it says, is the default value anyway, so you don't necessarily need to specify that. But then if you type in the number 2, then you're going to make the weekend, Sunday and Monday. The number 3, you make the weekend Monday and Tuesday, and so on and so forth. So in this example, I've used the number 6, which means I've said this particular person or this particular company has the weekends on a Thursday and a Friday. And as a result, between those two dates, you can see that this number is slightly different compared to this number, because if we're defining your weekend to be Thursdays and Fridays, then there were not quite as many weekends in that time period as there were, using the standard weekend that we did with the Networkdays function earlier. So if we assume that the weekend was a Thursday and a Friday, then between those two days there were actually 89 business days instead of 87 business days. So it all depends on how you define business days, what that function is going to return in the end. So finally, just taking these concepts a little bit further from earlier, if we wanted to find out, for instance, exactly what was the day 1 year ago to today, then we can just, like earlier, just subtract any amount of days that we want. So because we're interested in this particular example into the date 1 year ago, 1 year has exactly 365 days. So we can just subtract 365 days from the today function. That's going to give us, the year. The date 1 year ago. So if you ever see functions like this, it might seem a little bit confusing, especially 365 is a number that people recognize. But if someone subtracts 380 days or 381 days, it seems a little bit arbitrary and strange. But what they're effectively doing is they're manipulating a certain date, and they're returning a very specific date in history based on whatever it is that they're wanting to analyze. So it works not just obviously whether you're subtracting 1 or 2 days, that you can subtract any amount of time in terms of days from any date, and it's going to give you that particular date relative to the date that you've used in your formula. So in terms of days, it's very easy to move across different dates. Sometimes you want to just move from one day to another, but in terms of months rather than days, there are specific functions for those, rather than having to work out how many days there were, because months can be a little bit tricky. Some months have 31 days, some months have 30 days. February can have 28 days, and so on and so forth. So it's not as easy as just subtracting a certain number of days from any particular date. So there are specific functions you can use. One of them is called the EDATE function, which stands for effective date. And what the EDATE function does is it basically just looks at the date that you supply, and then whichever number you supply subsequently tells you how many months you're going away from the date that you've supplied. So if you're looking at today's date, and then you say, I want to look at today's date plus 3 months. So the number that you specify here tells you how many months you're going away from that particular date. Then that's going to give you the date that is 3 months from today's date, 3 months away from today's date. So if today is the 3rd of May 2017, then in 3 months' time, it will be the 3rd of August, 2017. So depending on what you supply in that function, it will tell you that straight away in that date cell here. Similarly, if you subtract something from here, if you say I want to subtract maybe 1 from today's date, then that's going to give you so if I said -1, for instance, in here, then you can see we're still on the 3rd day we're still in 2017, but we're now looking at April instead of May. So whatever you subtract from there, you're going to get that day in terms of months rather than days. So that's how you can deal with months specifically. If you want to look at the end of month specifically for a certain date, like we've seen earlier, there are various formulas you can use to manipulate that and jump to the end of the month. But it can get quite tricky and complicated if you're using the various day, year to day functions and so on. So there's a specific function, mainly because end of month is something that a lot of people do in finance, in marketing, in various departments, where they want to analyze a specific month-end date. So there's a specific function for that in Excel called the EOMONTH functions, which stands for end of month. And the way that works is, once again, you just specify the date that you want to analyze, similar to the function we just discussed there. And then you either add or subtract a certain amount of months, and it will tell you directly, what is that, what is the month that you're referring to, but not in terms of today's date, but actually in terms of the end of the month of the date that you're referring to. So what that says at the moment is we're looking at today's date, then we're subtracting 4 months from today's date, and then once we've subtracted those 4 months and we figured out what date that is, we then move to the end of the month of that particular date. So 4 months ago it was January. If so like 4 months ago in terms of today's date, it was January. So if we then move to the end of the month of January, then we effectively get the 31st of January 2017. Similarly, if I just go back 1 month, then it's going to give me the 30th of April, which was the end of the month 1 month ago. If I go back 2 months, then it's going to give me the 31st of March, and so on and so forth. If I add 2 months to that, then it's going to give me the 31st of July. So whatever it is that that you're looking at, this is really good because for things like February, like we said, February can be a little bit more tricky. So if I end up in February, you can see it gives me the 28th of February. If I go back, in enough months in time so that I end up in February. So whatever the end of the month was, whether it was the 31st, the 30th, the 28th, it's going to automatically work that out, and you don't have to specify what it was. And if there was a leap year, it would account for that as well. So it's really quite powerful in terms of what it can achieve. If you guys are happy with those, we'll just look at applications, which is the sort of final part of today's webinar. And this is really just putting all of the things together that we've seen to give us specific functions. And we'll just analyze maybe one of them in detail, and the rest of them, it's a little bit tricky to just see that on your screen. So you'll get the spreadsheet and the recording on the back of this webinar, so you can work that out a little bit, on your own and with more time available. But just to work maybe through one of them, which says the end of the last tax year. So again, that's a very specific date in history that we're interested in. So if you wanted to have the end of last tax year, then we have to work this out using the various functions that we've discussed today. This is going to differ again in every country that you're in. In the UK, the end of a tax year is defined as the 5th of April of any given year. So what we can use is we can use the date function that we saw earlier, and we can make the day the number 5 and the month part the number 4, because like we said, it's always going to be, no matter which day we're interested in, it's always going to be on the 5th of April. That is always the end of the tax year in the UK. So how do we find out the prior tax year, the end of the prior tax year? Well, if today is today's date, then we can extract the year from today's date like we did earlier. So if today is the 3rd of May 2017, then the year function of today's date is going to give us the year 2017. If we then subtract 1 from that year function, then we're going to get the year 2016. If we then add the month 4 and the day 5, then we're going to get the 5th of April 2016, which is exactly what this is saying, which is the end of the last tax year. Next year, if I open up the spreadsheet next year at some point, then the today function is going to give us the year part of the today function is going to give us the year 2018. If we then subtract 1 away from that, it's going to give us 2017, and effectively we're going to go to the 5th of April 2017, based on that analysis. So it's quite a lot of different steps that you have to do. But any sort of specific dates that you're interested in, you can use them with the functions that you've got here. So there's a couple of examples. You can work out the current year end, which you would do with this function here, which works pretty similar to what we've just discussed there. Or you can even make it a little bit more complicated using the end of prior quarter function, for instance, which is what you can see here. So you can see, it's getting a little bit more complicated, but like I say, you'll get a spreadsheet on the back of this webinar, so you can work these out a little bit in due course. And these are not, compulsory functions you have to use. They're just some manipulations to show you what is possible using some of the functions that you've seen today. And if this is useful to you guys, we can always do some more advanced webinars on that topic at some point in the future. There any questions from anyone? Or is that okay? Seems everyone's okay at the moment. But yeah, thanks very much for your attention. Thanks for logging in today. Hopefully this was useful to you guys. And if you have any questions or feedback, please do supply that to us. You'll get some questionnaire on the back of this webinar. So if you could just fill that in, whether it's good or bad feedback, we'd be very interested in just finding out if that is good for you guys. There's a couple of more questions just popping up here. I'll just answer them live, both of them. So one of the questions was when tracking a specific date down, how do you keep the same date? So that's quite an interesting topic as well. So if I say 01 or 2 2016, 2016 for instance, and normally if I track this down like this, then Excel is programmed to automatically change that date. So it's going from the 1st of February to the 2nd of February and so on. So that happens by default. How do we change this behavior? How do I keep the same date? Tracking that on. The easiest way to do that is if you hit the control button. So you take the control button, like you just press down on the control button, and then while you press down on that control button, if you then track that down, then it's going to keep that same date as you're tracking that down. So I hope that answers your question. So it's just holding the control key down and then tracking that down. Another question was centered around whether we can extract, say, Wednesday and Thursday and so on from a given date rather than just the numbers. It's a little bit more tricky. There are sort of functions that can achieve that easier than others. We can potentially do that in a slightly more complicated webinar if that is of interest, but effectively you can build various functions such as VLOOKUPs or match functions that give you that sort of idea. But if you're using any of the sort of previous Excel packages, then yeah, unfortunately you have to build that yourself rather using the weekday function that we've seen earlier. So the weekday function gives you the actual date and like the actual weekday in terms of a number, and then you have to use some more complex manipulations to get it into to get it to say Monday, Tuesday, and so on. But if this is something people are interested in, like I say, we can use that as an example in slightly more complex webinars on the subject. Cool. I think that's everything answered that I can see at the moment. So like I say, thanks very much for your attention, and I'll hopefully see some of you guys back in our future webinars.